Let's talk Vols. Number 8 in the final SP Plus rankings. They dropped below Penn State and Clemson from the post-spring rankings. First, before we get to dropping, if you can, just lay out the SP Plus rankings, what they mean, who they're from, for those that might not be familiar with them.
So the SP Plus rankings, Bill Connelly does them every year before spring practice, after spring, or I'm sorry, he does like a way too early SP Plus rankings right after the season ends. Then he does a post-spring practice SP Plus rankings. Then he does one right before the preseason. They take a lot of different factors into account, but primarily they take in returning production, recent recruiting, and recent history. Now, a lot of people don't like the recent history thing, but that does somewhat matter. I think particularly if you have a similar coach, that has obviously got to be a factor. So Tennessee, after spring practice, was all the way up at number 6. They've dropped to number 8. Penn State and Clemson jumped ahead of them. So they're still in the top 10, and they've been in the top 10 the whole time, pretty much since the end of last season. But yeah, it's based on return. And for the record, there's a lot of concerns about Tennessee's drop in production, and there's questions about their recruiting. So for them to be in the top 10 amidst those two questions actually means that maybe their returning production is underrated this year that we're talking about. Maybe we're overvaluing what they've lost.
Okay, so how do you move in the off season? How do you move from spring to now? I mean, how's there a significant change when nothing really has happened since the last rankings?
There's that transfer portal window right at the end of spring practice. So there's a transfer portal window from the end of spring practice to the start of summer, I believe. And I think that's where it comes in. So I know Penn State picked up 2 transfers during that period. They picked up Alonzo Ford and Aldavian Collins, I believe. Aldavian Collins came from UCLA, was it? I can't remember exactly, but that's how you can leapfrog. The bigger leapfrog was actually Clemson, because Penn State was just one spot below, but Clemson was like 12th, and then they jumped up ahead of Tennessee. I don't know how that happened. I have to be honest. As far as I'm aware, the only pickup they had during the offseason was another quarterback, and I can't imagine that leapfrogging them in the SP Plus. So, yeah, I really can't speak to what happened with Clemson.
Maybe we'll get Bill Connelly on here before long. As far as transfers, while they can have a huge impact on your program, that second window, man, Caleb, what do you really expect those guys to do with a summer and just preseason camp to learn your system? To me, that's almost a window that you're planning ahead for the following year. Just don't know. It's way different to come in January as opposed to come in May.
I mean, yeah, we're saying that, but don't forget that Nick Saban brought in Tyler Buckner in May, and he might be starting because Nick Saban is just that desperate at quarterback right now this year. So it's I think the second window comes. It's twofold, and it never. I feel like the second window never really works out for either side. But a player found out he wasn't going to start somewhere after spring practice because he wasn't that good, and a coach somewhere else found out that he has players that aren't that good at a position, and he has a desperate need for help. And that's where you get the match made in spring transfers. I don't know if Connolly's rankings take into account. See, I think transfer value should be weighted between January and spring. I think post-spring transfers are I don't even think it's a long-term thing. I think it's a desperation thing for both sides. Just praying to God it works out in 99% of the time. I think it's the equivalent of Mr. Irrelevant in the NFL draft, quite honestly.
So this wouldn't factor in Cooper Mays' injury, right? Or we had that on the message board. Would it factor that in?
I wouldn't imagine so, because that's so fluid. He would have to update the rankings like every day based on spring practice at that point.
Yeah, and I just speaking of transfer news, I want to dive into this really quickly, and we may do it even a little bit more in the coming days. The kid who signed with Missouri, or I'm sorry, committed to Missouri. I find it very interesting that he did so. Williams Winery, and that was a Tennessee prospect. I find it very interesting. He committed just a couple of days after Missouri changed their law into the coach can be there for negotiations during the recruitment process. Should Tennessee do that? Should we call Governor Haslam?
That's Lee now, right?
Lee, whoever it is. I don't do politics, Caleb. That's what you're for.
Well, if you're going to call it Haslam, call the former governor. Don't call his brother. I'm sorry.
I mean, why don't you just go ahead and why don't you go ahead and pull the trigger on that? What's the state of Tennessee waiting for?
That's a good question. By the way, can we just talk about for a second Missouri people going at us on Twitter yesterday? Guys, we had a really rough day with Missouri folks.
Got hammered, and I don't care. You shouldn't be in the SEC. I don't care. I was like, I saw it all.
Mark Twain died over 100 years ago.
That's right. But I tell you, just going to go ahead and say, my friend, I think that's something that Tennessee needs to make happen yesterday.
Well, here's the thing. The more you do these state by state openly defying the NCAA with their NIL laws that are in blatant violation of the NCAA's laws, the more you invite the federal government to go ahead and step in and create a national standard, which I don't like, because I think the minute you create a national standard, and I said this 2 months ago, and I'm going to say it now, the national NIL standard is going to be what Nick Saban wants, because it's being written by Tommy Tuberville, his representative in Alabama, and Joe Manchin, his childhood best friend. Okay, so it's just basically Nick Saban's bill is what it is. And it's also just nothing more than a way to funnel money out of the hands of athletes and back into the hands of administrators. And
here's my retort to that. I don't think Congress is ever going to get involved in this. And I think that...
So you got chaos.
Yeah, chaos. And I think that Tennessee needs to be ahead of the curve on that chaos and just go ahead and open it up where you can negotiate and sit right there with the prospect and with the potential endorser / advertiser that wants to be associated with him.